So today I welcome you to this episode of From the Desk of the Executive Director, and we are not at my desk, as you can tell. We're actually in a conference room over at the Micah Day Center, which is our drop-in center for people who are experiencing homelessness. And I'm with Judy, who I call you Sunshine, don't I, usually?
Yes.
Yeah, because Judy makes me laugh. She has a beautiful sense of humor and a beautiful spirit about her. And we had a really enriching conversation not too long ago, just before we filmed. So I'm grateful that she's here. And she definitely is somebody who understands this particular issue. We try to, with these episodes, we try to really talk to our culture and speak kind of truth to our culture, right, and what's happening in our culture. And in particular, today we're going to talk about the Gabby Pepetto, right, that everybody heard in the news, and Gabby's disappearance and relationship, and there appears there was some violence, potentially domestic violence, and so that's what we're going to be talking about, especially because that's a very big issue for the clients or the guests that we work with in both the program that Judy is in charge of and works with ESG, and also with our Micah Day Center, and really with all of our programming, because we know that people that live in poverty sometimes don't have the resources, but there's also poverty sometimes, or lack of, can cause some violence or domestic violence or situations in families, right? Yeah. And so what's your position here at Back Bay Mission, Miss Judy?
I am an ESG case manager. ESG meaning Emergency Solutions. That's our funding is through the ESG grant. And my job is to help those who are homeless find permanent housing, and those who are permanently housed but are in jeopardy of losing it. So we have the rapid rehousing and in the homeless prevention program, and that's what I do.
Yeah, so I think that's one part of our program that probably people are not necessarily very aware of, is kind of homeless prevention work, which is a beautiful way to put it, right?
Yes.
That we're helping people from becoming homeless and from being on the streets or living in their car or living on the beach or under the bridge. Yeah. So we kind of do both, and Miss Judy does both homeless prevention and works with people that are currently homeless.
Correct.
And I've heard so many of the stories, and it's really enriching to hear someone else's story, because sometimes our story is what we have that is most powerful, right?
Yes.
And Miss Judy hears a lot of stories. She hears from our guests, our clients, what kind of has brought them to this place. So we're grateful for the work you do, because I know it's really, really difficult work.
I really love my job. I love meeting
Yes,
the
you
people,
do.
and I love walking the journey with my clients. So
yeah, and I think the beautiful thing with Miss Judy is Miss Judy and I have some commonalities as far as people that we know, but also Judy did ministry work and did ministry around, especially around alcohol and drug and recovery ministries.
Right.
That's been a part of my work in the not-for-profit world, but also being a pastor, we kind of have that common bond of doing ministry and really seeking to help people connect with the God of their own understanding, right? So you did recovery work at a church, recovery ministry at a church. Do you want to talk about that briefly?
Yeah, so about 10 years ago, I was part of a church, a local church here. I still am. But I found myself just sitting in the pews and just learning from the teaching, and I just felt like with my experience and my training, I had more to offer. So, with God prompting me, I approached the staff, let them know a little bit about my past, my experience, and my training, and that, hey, wherever you need me, I'm willing to serve. And lo and behold, they had just started a recovery program there at the church. And the lady who was leading it, she had so many other tasks. She wore a lot of hats, and so she needed an assistant. And so that's where I stepped in. I did my internship years ago at a local nonprofit FaithBased Recovery rehab center. And so, what the funny thing is, and I think I've shared this story with James is when I finished that internship, I'm like, God, no more recovery work. Because it was very emotionally, mentally exhausting. Many times you had people like revolving doors coming back. And in my finite wisdom and experience, and even adding a little judgment into it, why do these people not grasp the concept? Just quit, But no, by the time I finished my internship, and to the day that I wanted to volunteer for the church in the recovery ministry, there's been a lot of life experiences in between that time, and so I grew as a Christian. I grew as a person, and understanding the struggles that is real within within substance abuse, alcohol, drugs. So the Lord helped me to have acquired patience. That's a hard lesson to learn. Understanding and to release that judgmental attitude. And so the ironic thing is when I made myself available to the church to serve, the Lord directed me towards recovery. I'm like, Lord, you are good. So I spent about 8 years there. It was a small ministry, but we built it up. We built it up to where we had a faith-based recovery program for substance abuse and for all types of hurts and habits and hang-ups. And then we, implemented other support groups like divorce care, grief share, and so forth. So so I do have that experience in working with recovery and helping people, walk through that journey with them.
Which is really, really helpful for the work that you do.
Yes.
With the people and guests that you work with.
Yes.
So you also, I know that you have some knowledge and wisdom around domestic violence and abuse and violence, and the news story about Gabby is that, from what we understand, is that she was strangled. And experts say, right, that assault is a red flag. It's a red flag for intimate partner homicides.
Yes, that's a new term, right?
Yes.
Within the past few years, it expanded from domestic violence to intimate person violence, intimate partner violence.
Yeah.
So if I can go back a little bit to my experience in church ministry with recovery, it helped me share my learning process of the stigma and the judgment to incorporate that during staff meetings within a church atmosphere. It was always, the Monday after the Sunday services, talking about numbers, talking about who you saw and how you greeted and did we present the love of Christ enough. But then I would mention, hey, we have a family in crisis. And it changed the dynamics of the conversation during the staff meeting to let them be aware that we have hurting people sitting in our church pews who really don't know where to go, because if they go to staff, they feel shameful. They feel like they're being judged. They're not a good enough Christian. So that way, with me inserting those comments and those needs during the staff meeting following church service, we were able to bring light to the hurting within our own body. And so that, I believe, is instrumental in seeing those around you in a different light. When you said bringing the red flags up, how can you tell if someone know is being abused?
Right.
So domestic violence, this is October, the month of many awarenesses, right?
Yep.
And one of them being domestic violence, intimate partner violence. It was back in 1981 when they reserved a day to observe and to be aware of those who are victims and to make aware of the abuse. And then in 1987, they dedicated a week. And in 1989, Congress passed a public law, and I can cite it, but where October is now National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And so it's real. The struggle is real.
And this makes this really relevant. And interesting what Judy talked about is woundedness, that there are wounded people in congregations, and oftentimes they're shamed, is one thing we just shared. Was there's a book by Henry Nouwen that he talks about, we're all wounded healers. If we allow our wounds to bring healing to others, that's really important to, as you said, to journey with people into their wounded places and spaces, and then bring that message of love and acceptance and healing and grace, right? Those are really, really
It's very
important.
powerful when you can tell someone that you're working with and journeying with, hey, I have been there, I got through it, let me help you. Or let me introduce you to people who can. Okay?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think both of us are wounded healers. That's part of our call that we sense is to live into those places. So what are your thoughts about domestic violence and violence in general, though?
Well, you know, domestic violence,
especially with those who are unsheltered.
Yeah. Well, domestic violence takes many forms. You know, I have listed here, there's physical, you know, there's the sexual, there's the verbal, there's the financial. How can you be financially abused? You need a partner withholding funds from you, money from you. You're having to survive through their means. You know, and James and I talked about this briefly, but abuse, domestic violence, is more or less of a control and power issue. Okay, and these are ways that they can control and have power over you. There's emotional, psychological, which can be lifelong impact and trauma. Okay. And then there's a spiritual abuse. How can the spiritual abuse keeping you from worshiping at your house, your choice of synagogue or temple or church, you know, or making you or using scripture twisted to make you submissive and and scared. And so these are the different forms of abuse, and it affects all peoples of all races, socioeconomic standing. I mean, and religion and nationality, and gender. Male and female. Don't think the men are excluded in the violence, because now you have same-sex partners. So, what do I think about the violence and domestic violence? I don't think it can be stopped, but I think we can help be the voice for the victims. Because of my faith, I have compassion for everyone, and I try to be understanding of everyone because, there's statistics, and there's the saying, abuse begets abuse, right? So to understand this power and control need, where does it stem from? What did they suffer in their past? What got them here? And many times there's substance abuse. And why is there substance abuse? Because they're trying to mask some type of past pain, and then with the use of substances, drugs, alcohol, it alters your emotions. If you feel limitless, you feel like you're inhibited. So any rage and anger you have, it's out of control. It's exponentially with any type of drugs or alcohol. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Judy mentioned too, like same-sex couples back in the day when I was at the LGBT Community Center as executive director. We were the first to roll out in the country a same-sex domestic violence abuse program, and it was fascinating because oftentimes those who identified as males or men had a really difficult time coming forward and talking about abuse. But we also know that in marriages with men and women, there's also abuse, right? That women can be the abuser too of the man. And so I think those are the things that probably we're opening ourselves more up to that and understanding that, and it's important to really walk with people wherever they're at on the journey. And I know for me, I think some of the abuse that's probably been hardest for me to get over as somebody who's suffered abuse has really been more the mental and emotional abuse. And because I think, like you said, there's long-term effects, right?
Yes.
Of especially emotional abuse, that it kind of comes back to you. I have a friend that does a lot of work around spiritual abuse for people that were in churches or settings where there was spiritual abuse, like you mentioned, where they're using scripture to make them feel guilty or beat them over the head or to control them, right? And she was in that setting herself and got trained then to kind of be a spiritual abuse counselor or therapist, right? And really it's fascinating when you think of the different ways that humans, how we interact, and we have healthy relationships, but there's that unhealthy aspect in so many of our relationships, right?
Yeah.
And being able to identify that, call that out, and then journey with people is,
Yeah.
is really important.
Yeah, and doing a little bit of research for our discussion today, I didn't know, because I've not looked into recent, research. Back then, there was research,
Yeah.
but I did not know, and did you know, that domestic violence is one of the most frequently occurring crimes in the U.S., but yet the least reported?
Least reported.
Yeah. And did you know in the United States, more than 10 million adults experience domestic violence annually?
How many?
10 million.
10 million. Wow.
And did you know 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men are victims of DV, domestic violence, or IPV, intimate partner violence, and 23% of women and 14% of men during their lifetime, during our lifetime. An estimation of between 3 to 10 million children witness the domestic violence annually.
Notice that 3 to 10 million. It's like there's such a wide gap because you're right, so much of it goes unreported.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then 30 to 60% of the abusers also abuse their children, not just their partners, but their children.
Yeah.
And then did you know that over 19,000 calls are intercepted by the DV hotlines nationwide on a typical day?
Wow.
Okay? And now put into reality our pandemic.
Right.
At the front, the throats beginning of the pandemic, lockdowns, isolation. And then you heard news reports of, of children and victims of abuse having to endure that more so during, the lockdown and the isolation. And then plus resources, shelters were not open.
Yep.
Or limited.
Yep.
Because of social distancing and the pandemic. And it still is today in many, many states, in many, many areas. So those were statistics that I wow. It could be a tool to help us engage in conversation.
Right. Well, and I think, you have to send me those statistics because I'm a geek for statistics. I love statistics and numbers, especially because it shows the impact in our lives, right? And the things that we're not sometimes willing to come forth about or willing to talk about or willing to dialogue about. And like you said, I think when you share those, it kind of opens up the dialogue. Kind of the last question I'd like to ask you, I think because we want to find that place of hope, right? As you've done this work, and as you continue to do the work as an ESG case manager, and as you've been a pastor doing substance abuse, and as you identify domestic violence, and as you move forward in the world as somebody who's a wounded healer yourself, where do you see the hope and hopefulness and the healing in all of this?
I see the hope in us as being a voice for those who are experiencing domestic violence and intimate partner violence. One of the frustrations I had when I mentioned earlier about my internship and working with substance abuse and recovery was why don't these people just stop? Some people think, well, why don't they just leave? Okay, but let me give you some reasons why people stay with their abusers. Okay, their self-esteem is totally shot. No, they're made to feel guilty. It's their fault. Things are happening to them. It's because of them. The cycle of abuse, meaning the honeymoon phase. You ever heard the honeymoon phase?
Yeah.
The cycle of abuse. The abuse happens, and then I made up this chart here. Cycle of violence, right here. Okay, and it says the incident, making up, the calm. That's the honeymoon phase.
Yeah.
And then again, tension's building, and then the abuse happens
Cycle.
again.
Yep.
It's a vicious cycle. Okay, and so that's why these are some of the reasons why the victims stay with their abusers. Statistics suggest that 5% of male homicide victims each year are killed by intimate partner. The feeling of being responsible for your partner's behavior. And then the financial part of it. You're living in that type of environment. You have no say-so. You have no control of finances and so forth. And then you have to worry about or be concerned about your children if you have children. And in families, they don't want to get involved, right? Most families don't. So where are you going to go?
And oftentimes, you find family members will side with one or the other or say, oh, you need to stay together, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so where do I find hope? People you work with, people you have, frequent contact with, your waitress, your waiter, the host at your favorite restaurant, the librarian, the gym, the people who work at the gym, the counter help.
Yeah.
Be vigilant, learn of what the telltales are, be an encouragement, have some resources available to hand out and to text or to just be really aware and concerned and help. Just don't sit back and read the statistics and say, oh, poor people. Many times when you're watching TV late at night, you see the commercials from back in the day before you do live streaming now, right?
Yeah.
Commercials. Back in the day when you're watching it late night and you see these commercials depicting children who were malnourished, it made you feel uncomfortable. So what do? The remote, you click the channel or you mute it and walk out of the room until the commercial's done.
Yeah.
We just can't do that as a society. We can't mute everything around us and isolate ourselves. We are to be in the world, not of the world, like the gospel tells us.
Lights.
Yeah. And so be that voice.
Yeah, so thank you, Judy. I think that's really critical and important. Be the voice, identify, and be open yourself for people to come and share, right? Mm-hmm. And then know the resources. And love. I think love conquers all.
Yeah.
It's love first and compassion and being a listening person and realizing our own goodness and bringing healing to others. I think that's really critical. So I so much appreciate your wisdom and you sharing today, especially as this is Domestic Violence Month, right? And we hear these news stories and cycles, and just realize here at Back Bay, we're here to really serve and to walk beside and to love and care for the most vulnerable, and obviously people that are deep into domestic violence and violence are really vulnerable. And so send us your prayers, send us your greetings and your love and your compassion, and be a part of what's happening here. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Miss Judy.
You're welcome. And I want to ask one thing, okay? If you or anyone you know is suffering abuse, or you have some into you is telling you, giving you, the clues, the telltales you're seeing, and if you yourself are a victim, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. That's SAFE, SAFE.
Yeah, Google that because it's really, really important. You connect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, you
others.
can. You can.
Yeah.
At thehotline.org.
Yeah. So peace to you. We pray many blessings and love be with you on this day. So thanks for joining us.